Obviously, you know that.
But I sent you 3 times, so
It's weird. I don't know.
why you're not
Connected online.
getting
This could be. I'm gonna close my internet and reopen it.
But you could just, because it's on our website.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
could just
we
go
could-
through your presentation.
it's true, and we can just follow along.
Okay,
Because we also have paper copies. So.
right,
Both.
exactly.
But the main thing is people at home can see.
Yes, that's
Um,
what
I am happy to do that. See if it comes, just checking, see if it can get through. Yeah, for some reason it hasn't made it from over there to over here.
Okay.
It's just gotta go to space first, I
Right there.
guess, right?
Yeah. Apparently so.
So. I can start just walking through.
Sure.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, let's get started. So this is Natural Resource and Energy getting started after a break on February 5th. And we are joined by TJ Poor, the Director of Regulated Utility Planning and for the Field Service. So delighted to have part 2. So, and you've met all of us, so we don't need to do introductions, so we'll, and so you, I guess we're not projecting your presentation, but we have a paper copy, it is online. We'll just tell us as you want to change slides.
Right, yeah, I will, I'll try and call out the slide numbers every couple of slides, as we go. And thank you for having me back, TJ Poor, Regulated Utility Planning Director at the Public Service Department. And so today is really part 2 of the presentation on kind of grounding ourselves in what the current state of the state is as it relates to electricity policies and programs. And so if you go to slide 2 here that have the overview, it still describes what we covered last week. And then really today, I'll start with our energy efficiency programs, our electric efficiency programs, and then get into the renewable energy standard and the programs which operate under the umbrella of the energy standard, standard offer program and net metering. And then move into issues of grid evolution or grid modernization. I noted last time that the energy plan had that as one of the themes 2 years ago, and it is still front and center as we enter 2025. And to the extent we have time, we have a few federally funded programs that relate to our electric sector policies. Again, like last time, if there are questions, I think this works best if we have conversation. And I think, we'll go at the pace we need to. And I will try and get through it and recognizing you all have a ton on your plate and you're allocating a lot of time for this, so I appreciate it. So starting on slide 3, talking about Vermont's energy efficiency utility. So we have
Just to let you know, our slides are not numbered,
oh no,
so
okay.
that's okay, but just sort of let's kind of help us if you know.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What's at the top? Just say what's at the top.
Yeah, okay, Vermont energy. I can see a number on my slide. That's weird that it didn't come through on the printout.
It's very faint, it's right here.
Oh.
Oh, you are right, it's very faint though.
Yeah, it is there. Just,
Well, actually, it's only on that one.
Oh.
Oh, no, it's right here.
No.
Where?
So on this is like.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
You
We both got your notes as well.
Sorry. Yeah, no problem. Just everybody has their glasses on, right? So starting with Vermont's energy efficiency utilities, on the electric side, we have 2 of those, Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric Department. Efficiency Vermont was created around the turn of the century in 2000, and it really came after 15-20 years of our utilities, who at the time had particularly our investor-owned utilities, had incentive to sell more electricity, and they did not have incentive to look forward and say, well, how can we save electricity and actually reduce our power supply needs? That incentive structure has since changed, but what what happened in the 80s and 90s is that Department of Public Service and the utilities were getting in these battles over their integrated resource plans, where they're supposed to plan for least cost supply into the future. Department to say, hey, you haven't considered energy efficiency is cheaper than the alternatives, cheaper than maybe building a big centrally located generation plant, right? So after a big public utility commission proceeding, ultimately and legislative authorization, the commission created Efficiency Vermont. And what Efficiency Vermont does is run electric efficiency programs for the state and on a statewide basis. So we see consistent programs across the state. There is one exception, and Burlington Electric Department delivers their own programs. They were kind of an exception to that rule in the 80s and 90s, where they had invested and took out city bonds and invested in electric energy efficiency programs. And so because of that, and because of continued good performance, they were able to keep their electric efficiency programs, but they do coordinate with Efficiency Vermont a bit. So those programs are funded by a separately stated charge on your electric bill called the energy efficiency charge. That charge is set to acquire all reasonably available, cost-effective energy efficiency savings. And then that language is straight from the statute, ESA 209. And the charge needs to be set consistent with these cost planning principles. And there's a whole lot of criteria set out by the legislature that the commission, Public Utility Commission, needs to consider when they set that charge. They do that, they set that charge based on budgets that are necessary to achieve that cost-effective, reasonably available cost-effective efficiency savings. They do that every 3 years and set a budget. That is a 3-year firm budget and it goes out for 20 years. And you can see what these electric efficiency budgets are here for Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric. Collectively, about $50 million a year are collected from Vermont ratepayers to provide those services. In addition to that, we do also have thermal services provided by our efficiency utilities. This is where I'll introduce Vermont Gas Systems, although we're really talking about the electric sector. Vermont Gas does have efficiency programs that are budgeted at about $6.5 million per year. Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric Department also deliver thermal efficiency and processed fuels. Thermal and processed fuel efficiency is the term of our programs, and those are funded from 2 sources. Those are the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Revenues from that program are delivered to the Electric Efficiency Fund for use for thermal programs. It's called the Electric Efficiency Fund. And revenues from the forward capacity market. So there's just in the wholesale markets that I talked about last time, one is for capacity, the ability to serve our peak demand, and energy efficiency participates in that market, and the revenues come back to provide these thermal services as directed by statute. So that as a really high level scope of our efficiency utilities. I showed this on the next slide, on slide 4, the chart on the left here, the charts on the left show the impact of energy efficiency over time. I think I showed these last time, so I won't go into too much detail, except to say about our load would be about 15% higher annually, but for these energy efficiency programs.
Do you have sorry to interrupt, do you have a sense of cumulatively how much Efficiency Vermont, let's say, has saved Vermonters over its existence?
Those numbers are available. I don't have that.
Okay, no, that's okay. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on the right, the chart, those 4 lines that you see there are the potential incremental annual megawatt hour savings available. So when we're in the budget setting process every 3 years, the Department of Public Service does a potential study to determine how much potential is there in order to know how much cost-effective potential we should set the budget to achieve. And what we see is that there are different levels from technical to economic to program achievable potential is the bottom line there. We see that it's relatively flat over time. So you could probably move up some of those savings to get in a few years, but then you'd have a sharp decline of what's available. And so that potential is relatively flat, even declining slightly. And that kind of makes sense. We've gotten a lot of the low hanging fruit with lighting and other, commercial programs. And so, but as we set budgets, that is, as a state, that's the process, and that's one of the things, key inputs is how much future potential is there. So that's all I had for efficiency programs right now. I think you've had Mr. Walken from Efficiency Vermont, BDIC, to talk about that. I assume he went into greater detail. Sure.
So if the future potential is flat. Yeah. Are there things that Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric and us collectively have to do to continue to be at the level that we're at? Like, is effort required, or is it like, oh, we did that, we picked that low hanging fruit and that's all we have to do?
So there are other opportunities. I think one of the so yes, there are other things that we have to do. Some of that is, getting, if there's like a stack of the low hanging fruit is lighting that's really cheap or to get, well, now there's these next measures that we could get that may be a little more expensive. So it might be a little harder to acquire those. The other thing that is notable is that as we electrify more, when homes are heated, more than 50% by electricity, then those become available electric efficiency measures. And so, one of the core components about the efficiency charge is that it is a system benefits charge in the truest sense, right? So those investments made on your electric bill, they are serving to reduce costs that all ratepayers would otherwise pay, whether it's a power supply purchase or avoiding a distribution upgrade. And so you're seeing ratepayer benefit from, even if you're not yourself actually installing an efficiency measure. And so that's a little different than, so there's those ratepayer system benefits, those kind of Vermont-wide benefits don't always accrue in the same ways to everybody with other fuels. Like a fuel oil reduction in efficiency or in usage really doesn't have those same structural benefits that everybody sees. That really helps the participant, but it doesn't help everybody else until you start talking about it from a global sense, societally, then it does. But when you draw the borders around Vermont, it's a little different. And those are I talk about trade-offs in the energy plan, those are the kinds of trade-offs that we think about. We got to look at what is the global benefit and cost, and what is the Vermont benefit and cost. I went on a tangent to answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I did. I'm sorry. Did I get to it?
Mostly I was just trying to figure out, is there maintenance required to stay where we are? To stay what we've already done? Do we have to do something to maintain what we've already done? Or is once you've checked that box, is that box just checked?
So we'll use lighting, for example, once a measure is installed, it is in there for its life, right? And then the expectation is that, and this has happened, is that codes and standards actually increase over time. And then when it's time to replace that measure, it is replaced in kind with that efficient measure. There may be a more efficient measure, but we're not really gonna backslide. And there's certain types of measures, like some of the custom measures. Well, there's now a new choice that a company can make that is, maybe they would potentially backslide, but that base we consider that to be kind of the base from which we get those new savings from. So codes and standards should catch up, and then we won't backslide, but we won't necessarily get the same amount of new efficiency for the same cost.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I totally went in the wrong direction.
No.
Starting with that one. Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears to our core policies and programs supporting renewable electric supply. This is slide 5. So since really the turn of the century, we have developed a number of policies. Starting in 1999 with net metering policy. And that, when that first started, it was really to allow Vermont homes and businesses and communities the ability to generate their own power. I will talk more about the current net metering program a little later, but it has changed over time. There's been 6 or 7 statutory changes to the program over time. I'm going to stop there on net metering until I get to that. In 2005, we had what was called the Sustainably Priced Energy Enterprise Development Program. It's a mouthful, but the acronym is nice. It's the SPEED program, which was intended to speed development of renewable energy and required utilities to sign long-term, stably priced contracts for renewable resources. So you think about Kingdom Community Wind, it came about because of that. And I think Sheffield was part of that. So the law came into effect in 2005, development time, right? Those are 2 big resources that were encouraged by this law. It didn't have to be in Vermont. It also encouraged contracts with, in particular, wind resources in New Hampshire and Maine that would bring renewables online. The key with this program is we didn't have a renewable energy standard at the time and requirements for utilities to retire the renewable energy credits. Other states had renewable portfolio standards. So our utilities under least cost planning were encouraged to sell those attributes to other states to keep prices down. So we encouraged the development of renewable energy generation, but we couldn't legally actually call it renewable energy generation because we had sold the right to do that to other states.
And one question about that, and so this is a mechanical piece, once you sold the RECs, they are sold forever, right? Like you don't have to, they don't regenerate every year. You're not reselling.
Not renewable.
Yeah, yes.
Well,
But that's a question.
So every megawatt hour that a facility generates gets one attribute, right? So 1-for-1 ratio there. And they're tracked every year and kind of minted every year.
Okay,
And so you can sell those renewable energy credits for the life of a project, or you could just sell them for 1 year or
Okay.
part of a year even. Like, these 3 months, the project generated this much, and I'm going to sell those RECs.
okay.
And so, I am sure that there are a lot of plants like Kingdom Community Wind, right? It was built by Green Mountain Power and others. They own the rights to those attributes. They've sold a number of those, but not so far into the future that future ones can't ultimately be used to comply with a Vermont standard, which we'll talk about. So in 2009, we started the standard offer program, or that legislation was passed. That was a program to deploy small scale renewable energy in Vermont, and had the state manage the procurement process for that power. So the Public Utility Commission it started as a lottery system. It started as 50 megawatts that were needed to be purchased by the Public Utility Commission for transfer to our utilities. It started with an administratively set price of 30 cents a kilowatt hour. It had kind of an incentive rate to encourage the development of the industry in Vermont. It was a lottery system. There was like a queue of projects to fill that 50 megawatts. And I say it was a lottery system, but it also was like you hit the lottery if you got in, because it was a healthy rate intended. No judgment on that. It was intended to be healthy for the industry. to develop, but it was a healthy rate, people wanted to do it, and a few years later, the legislature expanded the program to add another 77.5 megawatts to what should be procured for that, but they also it became a competitive solicitation. So instead of a lottery, developers had to submit a bid with a price, and the lowest cost prices won. And so I have some slides that show some of the results of that program as we go forward. Then in 2017, the renewable energy standard took effect. It actually was passed in 2015. That replaced the speed program, and that actually was the first time we required electric distribution utilities to retire those attributes and show that they had the rights to the attributes in their portfolio. I'm going to start going through kind of almost in reverse order here with the renewable energy standard on slide 6, because the renewable energy standard is kind of like the umbrella policy from which standard offer and net meter and other policies fit under for procuring renewable energy. With changes in last year's session, there are now 5 tiers of the renewable energy standard, and please bear with me and ask questions as I go through these tiers. Tier 1 is the total renewable energy requirement, and so this, I refer to the renewable energy standard as the umbrella for other policies. Tier 1 is kind of like the umbrella for the tiers, where every resource, eligible resources, are those that are defined as renewable in statute, and they can be existing in terms of their commissioning date can be whenever. It does not actually, there's no limitation. So some of the 100-year-old hydro plants will qualify for this to ensure that renewable energy is in our portfolio. That is now at 100% by 2035 and sooner for Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric Co-op, and the requirement is 2030 for those two. Under that umbrella, there are some tranches of requirements where utilities have to purchase renewable energy, certain types of renewable energy. Tier 2 is the distributed generation tier. It is a small resource under 5 megawatts that is connected to the Vermont distribution system. So it's the in-state generation tier, small scale in-state generation. That requirement previously was 10% by 2032 for all utilities, and except those that are already 100% renewable years ago. That's now 20%. It doubled for GMP and Vermont Electric Co-op, and it's 20% by 2035 for the other utilities in the state. One note is that one other resource. So there's a timing component to this. It's intended for new renewable generation, but new is now defined as 2010 or later. And so that is important for some of those standard offer resources that came online in the early teens, or even in the early teens. Those now qualify for this tier, whereas before those were sold, the renewable attributes were sold at the state. I'm going to skip over tier 3 for now, for the most part. That's a fossil fuel reduction requirement for utility customers, and stick with the power supply components. Going to tier 4, this is another new renewable energy generation tier, and it is for renewable energy and generation that is built after 2010. No size restriction, and it can be anywhere in New England. So the no size restriction in 2010 are important here. Those projects like Kingdom Community Wind and Sheffield can now qualify for this tier. So the term of art being used last year was rehoming those RECs. So we were selling that. The entitlement or ownership kind of pie chart that I showed you last time showed we had 10% wind. The post-REC district decision showed we had no wind. that's a big difference, and with, it going forward, we will probably see some wind in our post-political bit.
Because they were after 2010,
Correct.
developed, right? Yeah.
Yes. And the revenues that utilities were previously getting for selling those credits are, they're not getting those anymore, right? They're retiring. So that's the trade-off.
Would it also include, you said it can be anywhere, like offshore wind off
Yes.
coast of Maine or whatever, if one of our utility companies buys into some project there?
That's correct. Anywhere that is, can be delivered into New England. So I believe it would include, there's some wind projects in upstate New York as well that can be delivered, across, it's called the PV 21 across Lake Champlain. Those could also be.
So it doesn't have to be within New England.
Right, but it has to be able to have that kind of physical delivery, right? Yes.
Part of ISO New England is the region. Is it tied to ISO? Is it tied to ISO?
Yes, it has to be delivered into ISO New England. Yes, yeah, right. The last tier is tier 5, that is a load growth tier. So there's several utilities that have been 100% renewable for a really long time. Washington Electric Department, Swan Electric Department, Burlington Electric Department. Those utilities under this are exempt from tier 2 requirements, and I believe tier 4 requirements. But where there is load growth, they need to meet their load growth in certain percentages with new renewable energy, and that's what tier 5 is. Those percentages over time vary and they're complicated, and we'll get into the weeds another time. So the next slide 7 here, shows what this looks like over time for what the renewable energy standard requirements looks like by tier. Number tier 3 is a fossil fuel reduction tier. It's not shown here. Tier 5 isn't shown here because it's pretty small, and it's hard to forecast exactly when that load growth will happen. But overall, this shows us being 100% renewable by 2035. We see the big jump in 2030. That is when the 100% renewable requirement for Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric takes effect, and there's no gradual ramp up there. It's just up to 2030 in that year, or up to 100% in that year. Tier 2 gradually increases over time, the other thing to point out on this slide is the phrasing of net tier 1. So again, tier 1 is that umbrella for the other tiers. Tier 2 and tier 4 are tranches in there. So if you kind of work it the other way, it's that you need to get 20%, or Green Mountain Power would need to get 20% of their total load from tier 4, 20% from tier 2, and the rest to get to 100% is tier 1. The other important change that I'll note here is originally the res was based on retail sales, so that customer usage number. And so we totaled up all the customer usage and applied a percentage requirement to that. Last year's renewable energy standard, and this is, in my opinion, is a good change, but it is now is on total load. And that specific definition is yet to be defined by rulemaking process, but what it's intended to capture are the losses from generation, or where that is delivered to Vermont to where it is delivered to customers. So utilities have to procure more energy than is actually sold to the end use customers to make sure that they get enough energy, and the losses in between. And so we want those losses to be served by renewable energy. So
Wait, can I ask about that?
Yes.
But do you mean losses in the sense that getting from point A to point B with the energy, there's loss in between?
that's
Sort of like,
yeah.
This isn't the right word, but like off gassing, like, like you lose power in there.
That's exactly
That's what you
correct.
mean. Okay.
Concept. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It physically, the energy.
Electrons go
You take-
somewhere else.
Right, you need more, right, you need more in energy at point A to serve that energy at point B because the resistance, takes energy to get there.
Yeah, okay.
The music's cute.
Okay, so how have utilities complied over time with the renewable energy standard? Now, again, this is the 2023 compliance to the renewable energy standard, so under the old rules. This is on retail sales. For their tier 1 compliance, so everything is available. We had about 2/3 of that compliance came from hydro-Quebec resources delivered into Iceland and England. Another quarter was from other hydro resources in the state, like those big dams on the Connecticut River and elsewhere in New England. About 5% came from the tier 2 requirements. So as tier 2 is nestled into tier 1. How did we meet tier 2? That was mostly from the net metering program. We'll get into, like I said, the net metering program in a minute, but one feature of that program is that any attribute that is transferred to the utility as part of net metering must be required for compliance with the renewable energy standard. So those are kind of the first ones that get retired for complying with the standard. And then the remainder was other solar. No other type of resources were used to comply with tier 2. Mostly, there's a small, tiny bit of hydro, tiny bit of wind, but
So could you think of this second pie chart as being sort of like a blown up version of some aspects of the tier 1?
yes, so that arrow in between could, if that was the orange portion, if it was more closely connected with the orange portion, it would be better.
Okay, I see.
so-
Oh, right, so there's that tier 2, I see.
Right, yeah. Okay, so moving on to slide 9, the value or the values that were the prices of renewable energy credits really vary by tier, and they really reflect regional market conditions. So there's nothing too fancy about renewable energy credits. When renewable portfolio standards were first enacted, the idea is that developer can count on a certain amount of value coming from the energy markets or energy and capacity. And that wasn't enough to encourage renewable energy development for a whole lot of reasons, like advantages in the marketplace from already being there, other incentives that were given to older projects, etc. There wasn't enough money in the marketplace to encourage renewable energy development. So RECs, renewable energy credits, were kind of the mechanism to find the missing money, and the value of those was intended to be, energy markets plus RECs would be enough to encourage the project to want to develop. And so that's the concept behind RECs. Over time, as the markets have developed, there's a lot of people who just trade them financially, make bets that they think the markets are going to go one way or another. So it's a little less of that solving that missing money problem. But they still are a useful, these markets are a really useful tool of, hey, if I don't have enough projects in my portfolio, I need to go out and purchase a renewable energy credit. And what is that going to cost? That's what this slide is showing.
Just as I don't know if you're gonna get to this later, so, we can put a pin in this if you are, but just thinking about, how one of the benefits of renewable energy just in general is like peak shaving, right? Like, so it does ultimately provide some cost benefits, for ratepayers. And I mean, I appreciate that what we're looking at here is like the nominal price of a REC over time. And I'm just thinking about that as being kind of a gross cost, and that maybe it's more appropriate to talk about this in terms of net metering, but just thinking about that there is a netting out of some of that cost. Does that make sense? Like because of the benefits of peak shaving, for example. I don't know if you're gonna talk about that.
Not specifically today, so I'll address it a little bit here, is that when I say that the values that a developer could otherwise rely upon from the market.
Mhm.
Primarily, those values are the energy value and the capacity value, so that what you're talking about, that value at the time of peak.
Mhm, mhm.
Right, and so those values are really considered
Yeah.
in kind of that value stack there, and then on top of that is kind of what I have been calling the missing money here. Right, so the value of those peak shaving benefits, which, in the mid-teens, Vermont was headed towards summer peaking. All of our monthly and annual peaks were 1 to 5 in the afternoon. A lot of value there. Now our monthly peaks are in the evening, and our summer peak is pushing to 5, 6, 7 o'clock as well. There's still value there. Solar is still operating then, but not like it is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
So, but those values are counted
Yeah.
is what in the value set.
Okay. More questions about that, but I'm gonna hold on to that, mostly because I'm actually thinking about the origins of Efficiency Vermont and the conditions in which like that organization was birthed. You know what I mean? And like, how did people get to a place where that was an agreement? And I imagine that may be a part of the equation
Yes.
that people were considering. But anyway, I just wanna, that's the thing that I'm thinking about. That's all.
Yeah.
So please. carry
Yeah,
on.
and I should say, avoided, when we look at what the value is, it's not only those market values, it includes avoided infrastructure values as well. So it's not just kind of regionally that market value is, it's for what the energy prices are at that time, what the capacity prices. It's, hey, we were otherwise going to build a substation or a new line in order to serve this load, and we don't have to anymore. And so those values are really important to consider.
Sorry, thank you for information.
Yeah. So these, we often use, the Vermont market is really small regionally, and tier 2 in particular is very unique. We're the only state that really has a renewable portfolio standard type requirement that is solely focused on in-state generation. And so there's not like energy traders or utilities, buyers and sellers of renewable energy credits are there's not a specific market that they look to price Vermont. It's really just usually pegged to the Massachusetts market, which is similar, but not the same as Vermont. And so you can see some volatility in what those REC prices are over the last decade, but really they have stabilized in the last 5 or 6 years at $40 a megawatt hour, 4 cents a kilowatt hour for those high value renewable energy credits. If you're a developer, and you have renewable energy credits, you could say, well, I could sell these to a utility in Vermont, or I could sell them to a utility in Massachusetts because they qualify there, even though it was built in Vermont. And so they're gonna, they should take the highest price. There are other, considerations, right? If a Vermont utility can bundle the RECs and the energy and the capacity into a long-term contract that has developers, but this is still a good market insight to what the prices could be in Vermont. In terms of tier 1 is on the right, or a proxy for tier 1 is on the right, and that is the average main REC trading price. Their class 2 is kind of similar to our tier 1 here in Vermont. And you can see they're really low value. For a long time, they were like 50 cents a megawatt hour. But then they spiked to almost $10 a megawatt hour. And those are lower numbers than the $40, but it's on, if you remember that other chart, it's on a much bigger percentage of our load. So it can turn into very big dollars very quickly if it spikes. There were some changes to the main renewable portfolio standard, and frankly, some bigger players in the marketplace exerting gamesmanship on the market that caused that spike, but it creates real costs for Vermonters when that happens. those prices have settled in the $3.50 range. And that's kind of what we're expecting to see going forward, absent any big spikes or drops. Okay.
Why is it that we have to use the Massachusetts and the Maine markets as our sort of like, this is a good potential measure or proxy?
Right.
Is it just because we're so tiny?
That's more tiny and are unique, yes, yes.
We're special.
Somebody said weird, I wasn't gonna say weird, but somebody did say that to me yesterday. Yeah, that's true. That's right.
Okay.
So those forward trade, if you go back to slide 9 there, the dashed line are actual forward market prices where people have made purchases and sales going forward. And these are quotes from brokers that we ask for and they're willing to provide to us on like what this looks like going forward. And as of December, I think, that's what those prices look like. But they're, the markets in Vermont aren't big enough and they're different enough that they're not liquid to have kind of that future projection of price.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so tier 3 of the renewable energy standard, this is, as I said, fossil fuel reduction requirements of utilities for their customers. So utilities are required to make investments that cause those reductions. And what you see here in the chart are the types of measures over time that have been installed in customer homes. I apologize that here on slide 10, a lot of the colors in the chart are all different shades of blue. Makes it really hard to decipher. But what I can tell you is much of the savings have been achieved from investments in heat pumps. So utilities offer incentives for heat pumps and get to claim that they have reduced their fossil fuel by customers. The utilities file a technical reference manual, it's called, that for measures that are prescriptive, like a heat pump, in terms of each heat pump gets an average number of savings. In every home, it may be more or less, but you get an average number of savings for each heat pump. And then those are, that technical reference manual is vetted, filed with the Public Utility Commission every year. And there's opportunities for comments and changes on it. Electric vehicles is another big tranche here. That's the second blue down from the top. Is electric vehicles increasing in weight, I would say. And then there are, especially in the early years, there are custom projects. Think of replacing diesel generators for maple sugaring operations, running line extensions to those projects to power them with electricity instead of diesel fuel. Another good example is at the J Peak at the pump house, the water park there, that was they're keeping the water warm with propane boilers, and they transferred them to electric boilers. They kept the propane for peak times, so that we were causing new peaks, but a significant amount of that propane usage was reduced.
Well, reverse osmosis for the sugaring too.
Yeah,
That's the other law.
right.
And they did offer some good incentives to draw up, yeah, they did.
Is ground source, is that geothermal?
It is, yes.
So is that increasing at all? I know of a couple of projects in my area that are going to geothermal.
That is great. Those have really high upfront costs.
Yeah.
So I would say that they are a measure and utilities are able to provide a little support. How much support the utilities provide are kind of like tipping the scales and making that project happen. I think it helps, and even just the fact that there is like a state supported or utility supported incentive there. Like gives consumers confidence that this could happen, but it has not been kind of a huge portion of their savings, and it's hard to predict that going up because of those upfront costs.
Yeah.
Are they municipal projects that are?
One is a municipal project that hasn't happened yet, it's in the planning, and then one is a nonprofit. Or,
Unfortunately, they price themselves out of the consumer market, which is a shame because
So
it's the heat pump that actually works when it's really cold out.
yeah. Fair enough.
yeah,
It's a complete shame what that has happened with that whole industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, it's a lot of, drilling and groundwork, right?
Really?
Piping, yeah.
It used to be affordable though.
It's not-
I mean, if you already have the well, I mean, like, that's half of that one.
It used to be an affordable system and now it's not.
what happened? Well, this is a tangent.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, I think. Honestly, I think that so much money got poured into the system that all the prices just went through the roof.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that at some point. Yeah. Please carry on.
Okay, so. These are the 2023 reported costs of the renewable energy standard reported by utilities for each tier here. The number of renewable energy credits that were retired by each utility, they do that in the regional system, called the municipal GIS. In the appendix, I have that slide that I showed last time, which has forecasted, costs as well. These again are the gross costs of the renewable energy credits above, the value that the utilities see from the products. So if they had a solar plant, for instance, that where they had the energy capacity and renewable energy credits from it, they say, okay, that was priced at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. We got 6 cents of value from the other products, and 4 cents was the rack value and the cost of the renewable energy.
Sorry, and just to be clear, this total cost of compliance is the gross cost. Decoupled from benefits.
So when it's the benefits are accounted for in terms of the energy and capacity market benefits of a project. Those are accounted for, and this is the cost above that.
But it wouldn't count like the social cost of carbon or.
Right,
It
that's where I was going.
would, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it does not count for, so these are kind of the Vermont ratepayer costs, what we see in rates. And I will say tier 3 here, right, this is specifically the gross cost of 17 million. It does not count. There's additional load associated with heat pumps or electric vehicles, and utilities get revenue from that. They have to serve the power supply, but as long as there's no infrastructure upgrades required, the revenue is greater than the cost of serving the power supply. So it actually decreases some of the costs. That decrease is not included here. It is included in the forecast slides that are in the appendix here.
Sorry, I have so much to say about this, and I feel like it's also. Thinking about some of these, EVs or heat pumps, etc. I mean, we talked about the cost comparison of heat pumps to not heat pumps like in the last time, but just thinking about, for most people, it's going to be a cost saving measure. Just thinking about that there might be, again, a different kind of net when we consider the amount of energy that Vermonters are spending, or the amount of money that Vermonters are spending on energy total. Right? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, this is really just focused on
Right.
rates here for the 32 million, and so you can see as you go down to the bottom of this table here, there are in 2023 estimated to be 780,000 tons of carbon avoided.
Yeah.
Now, if you use the social cost of carbon, which the department does use when calculating social value, if you assume it's around $200 a ton, we're talking about $160 million worth of societal benefits, right? So this is one of the trade-offs that I talk about, right? It's $30 million of Vermont ratepayer costs for $160 million of societal benefits. Societal benefits are really global benefits. And then those are the trade-offs we struggle with, right? How much should Vermont pay to for these global benefits? And that is a question that there's no perfect answer to, right? And so that's the fun one to argue about. And that this goes from, yes, I'll stop there. I think I made that, hopefully I made that pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Question, so 782,583 tons of CO2. Like, how does that compare to Vermont's total? How many tons does Vermont, throw into the atmosphere every year?
Oh, good question.
It's 782, it's bigger than my bank account, but I don't really know if it's.
Look up the Energy Action Network's annual report and.
Right, which is based on the greenhouse gas inventory of, and I think it's, I want to say it's 8 million metric tons.
So it's almost 10%.
Okay, that's all I'm trying to,
Yeah.
put it into context. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
And this is based on the assumption that it starts in 2015, before we had the renewable energy standard, where about 50 to 60% of our electric supply was, contracted with Hydro-Quebec and nuclear. Nobody else was claiming those attributes, and so it assumes kind of that was the clean baseline, and then the other 50% was not, because we didn't have rights to any of that. And so that's kind of the high level basis of that. Okay, the last point on this slide, sorry, I said I was gonna stop, but that 32 million, it equated to about a 3.5% rate impact for the 2023 costs of the rest, as they're shown here.
Just want to do a quick time check. We got like 20 minutes and we got
Slides.
nice slide.
There's so much to
I'm
say.
sorry, I'm not good at peak time. Well, yeah. Let's see, I have about, net metering and standard offer to go through, and then here's a kind of a clean breakpoint to grid modernization, kind of some of those issues.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much I could try and whiz through all of it here, but
Maybe
there
we
might
can
not be time for questions.
aim to get through the net metering and the standard offer
Okay,
and not the energy modernization.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So standard offer program, you can see on the chart here on slide 12. Which slide numbers on the right hand side on this one. You can see where the projects are located around the state. The yellow projects are solar, the bubble size indicates the size of the project. As I said, it was intended to simulate small in-state renewable development. The program had a cap of 127.5 megawatts, which has now all been awarded in contracts. That means as of 2023, there have been no new solicitations for new power in the standard offer program. I'm gonna go to slide 13 here. This chart shows kind of the installed capacity by year. So you see kind of a bunch happening through 2014. That was that initial tranche of 50 megawatts.
Can I ask?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry, hopefully this won't take us on a tangent, but when I was on the finance committee, we kept having to talk about the wood burning biomass.
Yes.
What is the status of that? Is that a thing still, or did they create a fish thing out of it, or?
It is. And hold that question. I have a slide and 2 slides about it.
Okay, perfect.
So it is still a thing. And there is no, nothing related to fish anymore.
Oh, well, that was on the table for a while.
Right,
That
it was
like
gonna be
the-
a shrimp farm.
It was gonna be a shrimp farm, that was an issue that would not die.
So. Lots of deployment through 2014 and then kind of a steady amount of deployment, kind of consistent with the solicitations for many years. We have contracts awarded with almost 30 megawatts still pending to be built. Now, we're gonna go ahead to the next slide, the slide 14, no slide number on it, this standard offer prices paid. This is the last solicitation, and so there's different technology tranches in the standard offer. Where there's certain technologies that have administratively set prices or administratively set caps, I should say. And then there's like a price to competitive developer block. Those are the projects on the bottom. It's the biggest block, but the projects tended to be bigger. That last solicitation had prices come in at just over 8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a very good price for solar. So the competitive solicitation had the desired effect of kind of driving down those prices that were provided under the program. Now, in this tranche of awards and then the previous ones that had similar prices, there have been several projects that were awarded contracts, but then dropped out and kind of said, thank you, we had this contract, thank you for it, but we are not going to be able to build at this price. And so, that's one of the downsides of the competitive process here is you kind of get your contract based on a bid and you may or may not actually be able to build it. And so that's why there's still 30 megawatts kind of pending to be built under this program. There are also, not on the slides, there are also projects that are considered outside of the standard offer cap is the language, but that can be proposed at any time and awarded a contract, and they don't count towards that 127.5 megawatts. And even though there's no solicitations, those continue to be the case. Farm methane projects are the primary type of project that can take advantage of that opportunity. There's currently one, I don't want to talk a lot about it because it's an open case before the Public Utility Commission, but there's currently one in Linden that is been awarded a contract in that category. It's about 2 megawatts, so it's sizable.
So just to make sure I understand this, how is that different than standard offer? What is the?
So it's the same thing in terms, it's part of the program. So the standard offer had different aspects to it. One was you have to issue solicitations for 127.5 megawatts and get as much capacity. This meant, projects to fill that. And then another is, hey, if there's a farm methane project available, they can just get a standard offer from the state of a certain price, and they don't have to bid competitively, and they don't have to, and it can happen at any time, and it doesn't count towards that other tranche, that 127.
So I can make sure I understand, how does that other price get set?
So it gets set by the Public Utility Commissions, okay, after a process, yeah. I did not say that, thank you for the question.
Is it individual each time, or is it?
No, it's for that category of projects, yeah, it's really category, sorry, yeah, no, that's okay. Okay, last slide on standard offer is about the standard offer program base load provision, which is to encourage plants that produce electricity essentially continuously at a constant rate. Ultimately, there is one specific biomass facility that fits into this category. That's the Rygate biomass facility, which you're speaking of, Senator Hardy. So it is a fixed price contract. They get a little over 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And then that is adjusted for their cost of wood supply. Currently, that goes through 2032, but some of the recent legislation over the last few years required that facility to increase its efficiency in order to continue to have the contract. And then they've gotten certain extensions. So essentially, the requirement is effectively to use the waste heat from the facility in order for I think the words are economically beneficial purpose.
Right.
Right, and so that, you could read into a lot of what is an economically beneficial purpose. The ideas, to date, it have changed over time from a shrimp farm to a biochar production facility. To a wood pellet production facility and now a wood chip drying facility. So they dry the wood chips for use in other products. So there's some deadlines associated with that. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's this year or next year where they have to have that facility substantially complete. I think it's next year with the extension.
Yeah,
Um,
that was, oh my God, that was
Substantial.
terrible to deal with.
every year, yes.
Every year, yes.
Is that for biomass as well? Does that have to be dried or does that?
The wood chips, we're told would not be used for biomass electric generation. That would be an inefficient, like, kind of loophole cycle. But that actually drying the wood, using the waste heat to dry the wood chips that you already have to put in the facility, that would not be an economically beneficial purpose. But we had to ask them that question and tell them that we did not think, the department didn't think that would qualify. They weren't, but to be fair, I don't think they were proposing that either, but the conversation happened.
Thanks.
Okay, that's what I had on standard offer. 12 minutes on net metering probably is not enough time, but I'll do my best. So slide 16, as it said at the top originally, and what net metering does is provide a way for Vermont homes and businesses to self-generate electricity and support in-state generation. It's been revised a host of times over the years. With the current version starting in 2017, which we often refer to as version 2.0. Every 2 years, the Public Utility Commission reviews the compensation rates for the program, and they're currently on that 6th rate revision. So we're at net metering 2.6, with the next review coming in 2026. So what happens under net metering or net metering billing is another way to phrase that, is that solar panels produce electricity that go into your home to power what you're using. Meter measures both the excess energy produced by the solar, so more than what you're consuming at the time, and that's exported to the grid. The energy the customer uses from the grid, the customer uses energy from the grid when the solar isn't producing. Going on to the compensation structure inside 17, there's 3 main factors in how net metering is currently compensated. The utility looks at how much electricity the system generated in each month and how that compared to electric usage. The compensation depends on the category of net metering. I'll describe those in a moment, but it depends on both the size of the net metering system and the location of the unit. And then it also depends on what the customer decides to do with the renewable energy credit. So the customer can choose whether to transfer those to the utility or whether to retain it for their own purposes, whether just to claim their own renewability or to sell it in the marketplace if they were so inclined. Most net metering customers do transfer the renewable energy credits to the utility. And there is a difference, I'll show you on the next slide, in the rate that's received depending on if you transfer or not. The categories, just really briefly, there's category 1, so the small ones, smaller than 15 kW, they're the ones that are on your roof or at a home or in your yard. There's category 2, which go up to 150 kW on a preferred site. So that's like parking lots or previously developed land, brownfields, landfills, etc. Or otherwise on the same parcel as a customer taking at least half of the output. Category 3 is larger projects on a preferred site. Those are 150 to 500 kW, which is 500 is the maximum size with a few exceptions. And category 4 is projects that are not on a preferred site. And so those larger projects, if they are not cited on with or adjacent to customer load, are now no longer eligible. So virtual net metering is another way to put that. As of last spring, changes to the renewable energy standard is no longer allowed unless group net metering is still allowed if the prime off-taker is has the facility on site. But virtual net metering is not allowed.
Wait, so are you saying category 4 is no longer allowed?
It is, so it's a little more nuanced. It's
Right.
big projects that don't have a load associated with them are no longer allowed to pay. So
It's not really tied to that category.
correct.
Right, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just quick, so let's say hypothetically, somebody came in at 2.1, they're getting 15.4 cents. Do they get the 18 point? Are they, in other words, when they come in, they get a statewide, they get the rate, is that the rate they get for the duration that they own the system, or does the rate fluctuate for the owner?
So you're on slide 18 now.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
Oh, my God,
you're,
oh, I'm
We're
sorry,
still on 17.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
we can go to, that's okay.
Good question.
So we're gonna get into some of those weeds here
Okay.
on this net metering compensation. So you can see the different program versions of different rates that are set. So that net metering 1.0, 2.0 started in 2017 and different rates that were set. So first, before we get too into the weeds of the table there, if you have an on-site system and generate the same or less than you use in a given month, you're accredited just at the retail rate. So, and that's net of any adjustments. So that retail rate is actually not on a slide. So if you're in the table, so if you're at your home, you offset your own consumption, that's at whatever your utility kilowatt hour rate is. Any generation that you use in a given month. Any generation greater than you use in a given month is then called excess generation. And that's compensated at the then current statewide blended rate. That's what's updated every 2 years. So you can see that statewide, so it just says statewide there in this table. That is the statewide blended rate at the time that those versions were in effect. So that's what they got then for just excess generation, anything that's exported into the grid after a month. Now, for those virtual systems that are no longer possible, except for one exception, all the generation is assumed to be excess generation. So they got that rate to start with. So if you have the generation that's compensated based on whether you're offsetting consumption, whether you are offsetting consumption within the month, or if you're exporting to the grid, you have extra in the month. One extra point here is that generation, the excess generation payment can be used to net out your energy portion of the bill for up to 12 months. So you can kind of bank that credit going forward for 12 months. Now, what you see in this chart are the compensation rates at the start of each period. So in your example, in net metering 2.1, for the excess generation, you got 15.4 cents a kilowatt hour. And then if you transfer the RECs to the utility, you got an additional 2 cents. And then depending on the category you were in, you either got one, a penny more or less if you were a bigger project. And so those adjusters stayed constant. And the blended rate increases over time.
Okay, that's what.
Just like if you're offsetting your own consumption, that rate also increases over time. Those positive adjusters in net metering 2.0 through net metering 2.3, those lasted for 10 years and then went on and then go away. The negative adjusters continued forever. So we're at a point where the statewide blended rate in net metering 2.6 now is a little over 18 cents a kilowatt hour. If you transfer the RECs to the utility, you stay at 18 cents per kilowatt hour. And then depending on the category, you would get some reductions to an adjustment to that rate. So ultimately you could get anywhere from 14 cents to a little 10 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on the category. And that rate would then increase over time as the statewide blended rate is updated every 2 years. Okay, I apologize for reading some of that, but it gets very confusing and I want
That's very helpful.
So deployment, I have 2 minutes, so 370 what that program has done is got a set 375 megawatts of net metering deployment. So if you think about our peak capacity in Vermont is around 900, or our peak demand, I should say, is around 900 megawatts. We're talking, 40-45% of that. Some years it's lower, some years it's slightly higher, but that's a really high percentage. If you think about New York, made a recent announcement that they're going after 10 gigawatts of solar, right? They're gonna get 10 gigawatts of solar by 2030. Well, that's about 30% of their peak demand. We're already past that of what their goal is for the next several years. So I just wanted to put this in context. This is a lot, and that's just the net meter.
Standard offer would be on top of that.
Standard offers on top of that, and
In percentage.
In-
We've already seen.
yes, in percentage, not in absolute, because we're much smaller. Yes, that would be
Right.
pretty.
Yeah, okay.
I know you're gonna have a ton of questions on this slide. I'm just gonna say the cost of net metering as reported by utilities to the Department of Public Service, that above market cost that I referred to was $55 million. I'm hoping we can come back to that because there's a lot of details. And I do want to show you 2 more slides here though, in 1 more minute. Slide 21 shows that when you count both net metering and standard offer and our utility contracts, we actually have 545 megawatts of solar, and then another 150 megawatts of wind, another 180 megawatts of hydro, some biomass. We have almost 700 megawatts of the supply side distributed energy resources. So the smaller ones, wind are bigger projects, but those smaller ones. And then on top of that, I do have some slides in here on how much storage we have. 74 megawatts of storage, which is leading the region in the percent of storage compared to the load.
So many questions.
I know. I'm gonna stop after this slide and then hopefully there's time to revisit. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. We asked a lot of questions.
Well, none of this too.
My brain is working.
Yes.
I don't know what I don't know. So.
Well, I'm glad this is feeling useful. This one will tie everything so far together. So if I could have 1 or 2 more minutes. This chart shows the annual distributed energy resource deployment and it's by program. So the light blue on the bottom of the bars is net metering. You have PPA, stands for purchase power agreement. So those contracts with utilities. Then you have the standard offer program, and then you have utility owned projects. The dashed lines there's two sets of dash lines here. The bottom set, it goes from about 25 to 30 megawatts. That is the amount of distributed generation that was expected to be needed for tier 2 compliance of the renewable energy standard. Under the original renewable energy standard. So 25, in order to comply with that tier, we would need 25 to 30 megawatts of solar every year. And you can see over the years, we have far exceeded that 25 to 30 megawatts in many years just from net metering alone. With the new renewable energy standard, we estimate about 42 to 50 megawatts of distributed generation will be necessary. So that is higher than the distributed generation that has occurred in 2 out of the last 3 years. But you can see we have kind of a lot of these projects, and maybe to use the term, maybe I shouldn't, kind of in the bank, right? Where we have them in Vermont and we can, to the extent that those renewable energy credits have not been sold forward, that we can use those to meet compliance. So we would see kind of some of those which have been sold previously, those being used for compliance, and then gradually we will see more and more projects being developed to meet those needs. And we have seen over the last couple of years, maybe a couple of dozen utility purchase power agreements being filed with the commission, and those developers filing certificate for public good applications to get their site approved. And so they are coming as we go forward.
So what I am anticipating doing at this point is, because there are so many questions and there's lots to talk about in here, which I think is really good, right? So I'd love to find another time, and maybe, because I think having seen this once through is still like, it's still beneficial, do you know what I mean? It's sort of giving us kind of this foundation, and so if/when we can like get you back, then maybe we can revisit some of these slides that we kind of burned through at the end.
Yes.
Does that sound okay?
That's
And then there's more to go over even after that, so, okay, just gonna flag that, and so I know you probably have questions, but we're gonna